Greetings and welcome. Today we will be reviewing this beast of a game, Gloomhaven, that features 34 different monsters. If you've never seen a board game review by me, then know that they are a bit different, as I score the game from 8 different criteria with a total of 32 different points from the perspective of solo gaming. And the end part of the review is my personal preferences, where I add or subtract points, and I invite you to join me in that so that you can get a more customized score to your preferences so that you get a more accurate review. Gloomhaven is a dungeon crawler type of game that's 1 to 4 players. You're basically going from scenario to scenario, battling monsters, looting treasure, making money, buying items, and upgrading and progressing your characters, and eventually retiring them and replacing them with new characters. That's the whole scheme of the game as a campaign game. You can always play the scenarios as one-shot scenarios if you want, with people or by yourself. So with that, my solo gaming brethren out there, let's start with the quality of the game out of 4 points. So everything is there at the desired quality and size level. There's not necessarily a premium feel or features other than the large world map and stickers which you add on, award stickers and exploration stickers, and those you can upgrade to reusable stickers, which I would recommend, but the ones that come with the core box are one use, so they will rip up. I don't know how many games you've unboxed, but upon first impressions of this game, same with Jaws of the Lion, the organization is splendid. So with that, having everything you need and nothing feeling really cheap or overly done, I would say that Gloomhaven gets a 3 out of 4 for quality. Table space is the next criteria. So overall, it depends on how you manage the layout on the table. But since so many things have to be changed from scenario to scenario, the box and certain things can't be left too far away either. So you have to keep that in mind. The layout, though, is big. And that's not including the world map, which you're probably going to set aside. You can either fold it, put it away, hang it on the wall, or keep it open if you got a big enough table off to the side, because that map is quite large, printed on a board that folds. Aside from that, you're gonna have your tiles laying around, all your cards. There's a lot of stuff. How could I see that this could possibly score a higher point here, as I did give it a 2 out of 4 for table space? I would say possibly if the monster dashboards were smaller. They're about this big, which is not very big for each monster. Actually, that's pretty good size considering that it spreads out into all the different levels and such, and it gives you areas on it. It's a well thought out organization, all that. So those could possibly be a little smaller, as well as the elemental little tracker thing, little things like that, but it wouldn't help that much. Oh, and there is another great solution to all this, which is how Jaws of the Lion, it's more of an introductory game to this game. Instead of having tiles to lay out for the ground mapping for your characters, you unfold a book. And I love that idea, because before Jaws of the Lion came out, I wanted to create a board game that would use books, as I think that's a great way and a time saver. And that has been done for Gloomhaven somewhat recently, as well as miniatures, which we're getting into next. So you can actually purchase the upgrade of the books that you can then unfold. I think there's 2 of them, so you can unfold, match them together, so you can get the different ground layouts. Now, the miniatures here, there are not many, because there's only miniatures for the playable characters, not the monsters. And the molds, the quality of those miniatures is basic. I give them a 2 out of 4 overall. I mean, they're high detailed miniatures, so they're not just a step above meeples. You can paint them up and they look good. You can clean off mold lines and all that. These are single piece molds, and so the poses are pretty limited, and also the plastic is a little bit more on the softer side, and there are 17 characters included in the game. The rest of the monsters, a whole bunch of them, use standees, and there is a good reason for that. And well, the reason, well, I mean, it's right here. I mean, look at the box. This is how big the box is, and it's packed. If you were to include miniatures, that would up the price for shipping for everything of this game needlessly. But if you do want them, There's a new upgrade now that came out, a couple years ago where, because people wanted that, you can upgrade the full game, and they made miniatures to replace all the standees, even the summons, the creatures that you summon. That's a pretty cool upgrade if you want that option, and I think that's done right. And now we get back to what I was talking about, that booklet solution, and that's setup. Because for setup, out of 4 points, this game does not do very well, in my opinion. The setup is long, and I'm talking between each scenario. There are many pieces to this game that are involved in every scenario. There are cards that have to be changed every scenario, and that's monster cards, character cards, possibly item cards, event cards, dashboards, standees, tiles, tokens. A lot of it has to be changed from scenario to scenario. I would say it is too long in comparison to the gameplay of every scenario. Some of the scenarios can go a little bit smoother, faster than other ones, but considering how long those gameplays are, especially being a solo gamer, they take a good portion of your gaming time, especially so if you're like me, where you usually game at the end of the night when your energy is a little bit lower, and it's a relaxing nightly event that you do. Life is too short for that. And so for setup, I give Gloomhaven a 1 out of 4. As far as fiddliness, which I've wrongly worded in my previous board game reviews as finickiness, for fiddliness, I'd have to say this game gets a 2 out of 4. Let me break that down a little bit. Some rules just get a small mention. For example, the monsters, like getting loot from them, how that works. Each one drops a coin. I mean, I already knew that, but then when I was looking to clarify that when I got back into this game because I did play Jaws of the Lion a while back, I noticed that finding the answer for that confirmation was not as easy as I was expecting. At least enough for me to make a note of that and then looking it up online. So some things are not that clarified or that intuitively placed in the rulebook. Rules concerning the fight, modifier decks, and initiative, who goes first, decks on complex actions will need some back and forth with the rulebook or even online forums as it can get complicated. And you gotta figure there's 17 different characters, there's a variety of abilities and attacks and such. Overall, the finickiness is definitely much more for newer players. Once you get into the grind of things, the rulebook revisits are much lessened, but still pretty consistent for a while. But you gotta figure how big the game is. There's naturally gonna be a level of fiddliness to it. As for my next criteria, which is satisfying events, there are those battle moments that are wonderful at times. I do know that a lot of people love or really enjoy or appreciate the card system in this game. Really quick, comparing to Jaws of the Lion, if you have played that, the attack modifier here's are more brutal. You have stronger effects, you have more triggering effects, things like that, and that's really cool. So that's quite satisfying. Also, the progression system here has a lot of satisfying moments in it where you're choosing new cards to add to your abilities deck as you're upgrading your character. Attack modifier is being adjusted and upgraded as well. You can spend your money on things like items, but not just that, ability upgrades on your cards themselves, which is pretty awesome. The long general repetitiveness of the game quite thins down the hype. It is a long game if you want to play through the whole thing and, follow the campaign and all that. It does get repetitive, so that means eventually you've experienced many, if not all, or a lot of these things so many times that it's just not that big of a high anymore. But then in the long scheme of things, the game does have certain events that happen to keep some hype going and some hope. Certain events, items, characters can come up as quite underwhelming compared to the built intrigue and effort put forth beforehand. A couple of things I have to call out here are items. For instance, you're expecting some awesome sword or amazing bow that will do something, and it just adds a little speck of additional advantage. What really ruined a big moment for me was I was looking forward to retirement. Somehow my campaign playthrough has been for 30 plays now with the same characters. I haven't retired yet. And finally, I got to the point of retiring one of my characters, and then I was hit with this surprise, little bit of spoilers. I think I got the unluckiest one because a lot of the other ones you get to unlock another character, do something and done. But this unlocked this big puzzle that goes existential with the game. And to be honest, that's why I'm taking a break from the game, doing this review, and I'll get back to it to finish that campaign later. I found it a good time to take a break. I just wanted to take a break after I already retired and got a handle of the next character I'll be playing. It was a big buzzkill for me, and for that reason, I give satisfying events here for this game a 2 out of 4. You could play this game through twice, thrice, and not run into that retirement goal event. It's not a huge deal breaker, but it is important to mention here, and I think it deserves to influence the score here. The size of the game is big, and so for choices, it gets a 4 out of 4 perfect score. First and foremost, the core game is complete. No expansions are necessary for hours, days, weeks, months, or even years of play, depending on what stock of board games you have and how often you play them. There is a good amount of characters to choose from. All of those won't be unlocked from the start, but enough will be unlocked to have a good time. And it's cool that some of them are locked. I mean, that gives you something to look forward to. And there are a ton of monsters to play, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video. The character customization is great and the scenarios many. I almost wanted to subtract 1 point for lack of options within the plays themselves, the game itself, as in the end, the pattern of play becomes very simple. You visit town, battle monsters, rinse if you want, and then repeat. But I figured that wouldn't be fair to subtract that point, as that's just what the game is. I mean, it's a long campaign game, and that's what a lot of people want. If you're gonna cut it in half, people will say it could be longer. It happens to be that long that you're not gonna really need expansions. Unless this really becomes heavily your lifestyle game of choice. 95 different scenarios. You're not going to go through all of them because they branch out, but there are 95 in here. For my 8th scoring criteria, Intrigue. Let's talk about that. How strongly do you look forward to coming back to the game? How often do you find yourself thinking about it when you're away from it? How curious do you feel about it and hopeful? Well, as just mentioned with the prior criteria, the gameplay is repetitive from the macro perspective. The Intrigue quickly begins to focus predominantly on character progression as far as ability upgrades rather than on what's going in and around Gloomhaven. After a decent amount of plays, there are less and less highs for a desire to jump back in, especially with the lingering game setup negatives. For those in love with the game, the battle system though, I could see the balance here swaying in the direction of a 3 out of 4 instead of the 2 out of 4 that I'm giving this game. Although in this case, I'd say see how you feel after, say, 30 scenarios. And so with that general scoring, that's 18 out of 32 points total. That's 56%, or about 5.5 out of 10. So as for now, let's see how my personal preferences change it for you and I. So if you want, take notes here for yourself, or just go with how I feel if you really feel like your board gaming desires and enjoyment in solo gaming is similar to mine. But otherwise, take notes and subtract and add only the numbers that you think are relevant to your board gaming taste. So the first one, the game system itself, I have to add another point. And what I'm talking about here is that card system. There's no dice. You're always going to do 2 actions. You have the bottom of one card, the top of one, and that's it. The element system triggering effects is awesome. 2 different kind of rests that you can do. There's attack modifier cards that you can really customize and change up. The randomness is not that heavy, and there's even an extra rule that where you can reduce randomness even more and make it less drastic in effect. Also, there's hitting goals for additional perks to help with your character's progression. There's a big variety of abilities and how they work. There's also that world map where you earn stickers, you earn rewards, awards, and sticker up that world map and make notes and fill it up with all these flags and such of your great achievements. Next, for game flow and length, I'm adding a point. So that's another +1 because of system and limited hand card number. And I did mention this before, game lengths are predictable and manageable. Each character's hand can only have a certain amount of cards. You have this management of time, and throughout the game, you constantly know how far you have to go until the scenario ends, more or less, or how long you can last, and that's pretty cool. For progression, I'm adding 2 points. The video gamey aspect of the game is excellent. And I'm talking about the progression. You can upgrade your abilities by sticking little stickers on the cards. Instead of you're doing 1 attack, you're doing now 2 attack or 1 more distance. You can buy that and upgrade abilities. Not all of them, but most of them. And I think that's awesome. And when I saw that here, because Jaws of the Lion didn't have that, that's very cool. So it's little things like that. As the campaign and different aspects of the game progress, new things are unlocked. That's always a wonderful thing. And this includes characters. For example, after yours retires, the game doesn't just end, but continues and changes slightly. So it really is quite an epic game. You might just want to add 1 point there, but I'm adding 2 for that because I think that's quite a big strength of the game. Then I'm adding another point for lots of game. In summary, the box is packed. The value for money is excellent. And if you buy Jaws of the Lion, that is packed as well. It's smaller, but you can barely close the lid and it's heavy. This game's bigger. You would think it's going to have more empty space. It's the same thing as Jaws of the Lion, just bigger, more stuff. And you know what, with Frosthaven, basically Gloomhaven 2, which I also already unboxed, I haven't played that yet. Same thing. It's even bigger than this game. It barely closes. There's enough game for a long time and enough dungeon crawler for some. If you've been around this channel, you know that I'm a mini lover, so I just want to mention this one. I'm not adding or subtracting anything here. I'm just pointing out how this makes sense. I'm giving it 0 because miniatures are always a positive. I love miniatures. The more miniatures, the better the game for me. But there are 97 monster standees in this game. So that should just really clarify why there aren't that many miniatures here and why it's not necessary for them to be there. Nonetheless, if you want them, there is that upgrade where you can buy miniatures for Gloomhaven now. Plus, setup already takes long enough. Miniatures wouldn't speed that up. Repetitive and grindy, -1. Even though the system is good, eventually everything gets repetitive, especially since every scenario is essentially the same thing with some changes. You know, it's better with breaks now and then, but because there's so many bits and little things going on and, you know, the layout of the game and all that, and you want to remember things, you do want it to stick around and keep on the grind, which makes you feel almost trapped at times that you have to continue this game, and you might know that feeling. It's not a good feeling. It's kind of an undigested, or should I say hard to digest feeling. And so with that, if you lose a scenario and you have to replay it, that is a total drag. Next is unbalanced, -2, -1 point for characters and -1 point for scenarios as to character count aspect. Some scenarios are just not best prepared for 2 characters in mind for a solo gamer. Some characters are also clearly more effective than others. Stronger developed characters can definitely make the game much more fun than weaker, more boring developed characters. House ruling may be necessary at some points, even though you can adjust the difficulty nicely. Anytime you have to mention house ruling, that's kind of a negative by nature, right? So whether it's due to trying to avoid scenario replay, a scenario that is almost impossible to beat, or requiring a specific ability, or some crazy puzzle pops up that just breaks the borders of the game's physical contents themselves. And yeah, also retirement for your character may come much earlier than you'd like it to, or much later than you wanted. I've seen complaints about that, but for the playable class unbalanced, it's not that bad, so maybe you can take off 1 negative there, so just -1, that's up to you. You can read around, see how you feel about it. Next, disengaging. I'm giving it a -1. After a while, when you're playing an adventurous fighting campaign game where you're heroes and, you're battling and things like that, you're mercenaries, you want a feeling of exploration. You have this big roadmap, right? But there is not much of a feeling of exploration here, really at all. Not in the bigger scheme of things. There's micro little moments and events. A better and longer story write-up could help, but probably not, as the scenarios don't carry much individual character. It's just hack, slash, and splat monsters. The lore doesn't pop up strongly or really well in the scenarios. You're just on the chessboard doing the same thing, but fighting different monsters with maybe some different abilities or a little bit of rules how to get to them or how to affect them. The lore doesn't seep through. It's not really soaked into the gameplay very well. And this is something I like with this theme of game, with killing monsters and adventuring instead of, for example, running a business or flying through space. I want to be more immersed, and here I don't feel very immersed at all, especially not after grinding for a while. That's not necessarily a big negative, because that's just what the game is. It's not a reading a book and then fighting a little. The game really is those different board setups, and it does all that very well. It's easy to forget plot points and where you were and where you're going, things like that. They're never effectively brought up during scenario gameplay, and that's where you're spending most of your time. And also, as I mentioned, I have been taking notes, and the reason I also do that is because I'm going to present a full playthrough of this game, but not just playing like this and stuff. I mean, I don't watch board gameplays. I feel they're kind of boring, but to watch the entire story of what happens in Gloomhaven, what bosses you fight, why, what's going to happen next, I'll watch a video like that just to see what it's all about. I'll watch it while I'm playing the game or doing something else or at work or whatever. I'm going to narrate it, summarize the moments so you know what the story of Gloomhaven is, because I believe a lot of work was put into a lot of board games, and people will never see what the world was about because they're never going to want to jump into a game. Maybe it's not their thing. It's not as easy to watch as video game. I think that's going to be a unique take on YouTube. And for whoever finds those videos, because YouTube sucks, I think you will enjoy them. So with my personal prefs, yours might have changed. For me, it was a 19 out of 32. So essentially, if you put a grade score, like in schools around here, a D-, it would be right at 60%. So if you're going to put it out of a score of 10 and set aside the grading rubric, then it would be a 6 out of 10. I don't know if I should be putting those A, B, C, D, F school grading scores up, as that may not be clear, because what people feel a 6 is not necessarily the same as a D in high school, since a 5 is like average, but in school a 5 is like fail. Overall, there is a lot of judgment on this game because there is a lot of game. Many games you don't feel obligated to play 50 scenarios or something like that for completion, much less 70 plus. You play 25 to beat the main story and review it or contemplate on it over that experience, hence the grindiness may not be as much a keyword as it is here. It's not 20 scenarios of Zombicide, but what feels like an endless line of scenarios that could burn out a completionist. And also, I would like to add that it depends on your collection. If you don't have a lot of games, you're limited on time, budget, whatever it is, you want that one game, this is an awesome choice. But on the other hand, if you do have a lot of games, a lot of big games, shoot for Jaws of the Lion or something like that. Honestly, the scoring here doesn't necessarily say how much I like it among others, but I do think the scoring helps me clarify its position much better. I'd honestly love to know your feels of this game and how they correspond with mine.